If your travel footage looks jittery, harsh, or just off, it's probably not the camera. There's one setting that quietly ruins most travel videos, even on the Pocket 3, and that's shutter speed. Specifically, leaving it in fully automatic. And most people don't even realize it's happening. Now, in a lot of my videos, I recommend keeping things simple, even using auto exposure. And that advice still stands. But exposure controls brightness, and shutter speed controls motion. In this clip, the shutter is in full auto mode and very high to adjust the exposure correctly for a bright day. Now, if we pause the clip, we see that the birds have very little motion blur, which can make footage look jittery. Next, let's do the same again with a fixed shutter speed. And if we pause it again, we see that the birds now have more motion blur. Now, you may not realize this, but due to this motion blur, your eyes and brain see this as more natural movement. So letting the camera decide motion is where most travel footage falls apart. Shutter speed affects how motion looks in your video. When it's left on auto, the camera constantly changes it every time the light changes. And that's why you can get jittery pans, harsh movement, and footage that just feels robotic or unnatural, like something's off. The camera isn't broken, it's just reacting too aggressively. Now, these clips are from the same camera with the same movement. They're shot at the same frame rate, and the only difference is shutter speed. One is fully automatic, and one is locked. It has the same camera and a completely different look and feel. One looks natural to our eye, and the other looks more jittery due to lack of motion blur. Travel footage suffers the most from this because light is constantly changing. You're moving from sun to shade, indoors to outdoors, bright streets to darker spaces. Here we see the different shutter speeds in auto mode. This will get lower in darker areas to let more light into the sensor, and go a lot higher in bright areas to stop too much light entering. If you don't have too much movement in your clip, this can be fine. However, if there is a lot of movement in the scene, this may be an issue, and a fixed shutter would be better. In auto, the shutter keeps jumping around to keep the exposure stable. So every clip ends up with a slightly different motion look. That's why travel videos often feel inconsistent, even when everything else feels fine. Now, a good example of this is moving cars. In auto mode, they can look jittery. Again, if we pause the clip, we can see that they have very little motion blur. But if we use a fixed shutter, we can get a more natural movement to our eye. And if we pause the clip, we see that there's more natural motion blur. The fix is simple. If you do notice jitter in scenes that have a lot of motion, try locking your shutter speed. If you're shooting at 30 frames per second, lock your shutter to 1/60. If you're shooting at 24 or 25 frames per second, lock it to 1/50 and let ISO float. That's what the camera is good at. If it gets too bright, use an ND filter. This will allow you to keep your shutter locked and get the correct exposure. Now, if you've been using auto shutter, you haven't been doing anything wrong. In fact, the camera encourages it. The Pocket 3 has good dynamic range and can usually handle changes in light when you're just walking and talking, for example. But it's designed for exposure, not cinematic motion. So if your travel footage feels off and you can't explain why, this is usually the reason. So in summary, if the motion in your footage feels off, try locking the shutter and let the camera handle the rest. If it's too bright, use an ND filter and your footage will instantly feel better. So there you go. If this helped, check out the next video over here. It is in full auto mode and has a very high may not realize this due to the the camera is constantly changing it every time. Shutter speed effects, high motion.